Here's a quote in a book that was published recently by Barry Magid, who is a Dharma successor to Joko Beck out in San Diego. He's a psychotherapist in New York City. Or no, it's not New York City. I don't think he lives in New York City.
It's Florida?
Someplace.
It's the same. The
Yeah,
suburb.
Same thing.
The 6th borough.
And he's recently published a really good book on koan study in psychotherapy. And it's called "Nothing is Hidden." But here's a quote that that really resonated with me. "We are caught in the grip of our own unconscious beliefs, beliefs that have arisen as our own curative fantasies about what can end our suffering. These beliefs may reside for years outside our conscious awareness, masquerading as common sense." And the reason that resonated with me so much, well, actually, you know, it was really brought to the fore when Roshi gave his Dharma talk last week on, what was it, the third case of the Denkaroku. And if you'll remember, it was talking about Ananda's realization prior to the first Buddhist council, and how the council would only allow him to be admitted if he passed through the keyhole of the door, which he did. Now, you know, that's very fanciful, don't you think? Totally impossible, of course. Completely, you know, unacceptable in some ways. But I want to invite you to try and imagine a context, a mind that could see that as really happening. It's difficult because we're no longer in touch with that world. But I want to point out to you that we may be living in a context, a mental context, that is just as weird. And that's what I want to talk to you about this morning, is then and now. Because there is a big debate going on right now, mostly within the pages of Tricycle magazine, about this matter of context. And it has a lot to do with the legitimacy of our practice, quote unquote. It has a lot to do with the authenticity of our practice and whether what we have brought to this country can be labeled Buddhism at all. Because we practice it very differently, and we practice it that way largely because of the context in which we live. A lot of this discussion has been based on a very large doorstopper of a book that was published in 2007 by a very well-known Canadian philosopher at the University, I think he's at the University of Toronto, by the name of Charles Taylor. And the title of this book was A Secular Age. And what he was exploring was how secularism has arisen in modern society and has completely changed the context with which we view things, with which we view this world. I got onto this book because it was suggested to me by a European friend of mine. And he's somebody that I periodically am in touch with, and I can ask, I always ask him, what are people reading in Europe? And I can tell you that it's not what we're reading here. And one of the best sellers in Europe in 2008 was Charles Taylor's The Secular Age. That's the kind of thing they read in Europe, if they have an interest in.
Or they're stopping their doors.
Yeah, right. Charles Taylor talks about the fact that 500 years ago, an ordinary guy living in European society could not be said to believe in God. Belief implies a choice. You can choose to believe in something or not believe in something. That's the way we talk about it today. 500 years ago, it was entirely different. It wasn't a choice. It happened to be a fact. God pervades this world and is made manifest in all of the objects that are on this world. That was a given. It wasn't a belief. He never questioned it. It was something that you didn't question. It's just the way it was. That's the kind of context I'm talking about. This is a very deep assumption. And it's unavoidable because it colors everything. You know, the world was an animus. It was an animated object. It was filled with the presence of the Lord. And His works could be seen everywhere. I like, I think it was Charles Prebish in one of the articles in Tricycle was talking about how one of the basic ways in which our context has changed has been that in the pre-modern world, everything was exterior. You know, if I saw a ghost, if I thought, in modern language, if I thought I saw a ghost, 500 years ago, I saw a ghost. There was a ghost. There wasn't any question about it. People got burned for such things. Everything was exterior. God was made manifested in the external world. Miracles occurred in the external world. Spirituality was right there in front of your face. One of the big changes that has occurred is that now it's all interior. It's all mental. You know? It's all a question of belief. It's all a question of conjecture. It's inside of ourselves. 500 years ago, there was no such thing as what we call, in philosophical circles, radical empiricism, where everything is a projection of ourselves. Today, everything is a projection of ourselves. That's the way we think, automatically. Now, I think a similar situation exists with regard to Buddhism, the Buddhism of 2,500 years ago. That was an entirely different context. We're not even talking about Europe anymore. We're talking about northern India, what is now Nepal. And it's totally different. And if Ananda was seen to enter the room through a keyhole, he probably did. no question about it. You see, we find that funny, right? Why do we find that funny?
Seems impossible.
Why does it seem impossible?
I wouldn't fit.
Yeah, right. You know, we have this thing called scientific rationalism. See? That's a new thing. That's a modern thing. They didn't have that in the pre-modern world. And whether we like it or not, we're always employing scientific rationalism in practically every judgment that we make, particularly about the external world. Of course, that raises a very interesting question, doesn't it? Well, if scientific rationalism is nothing but a context, what's it going to look like, 300 years from now?
Very narrow.
Possibly. Could be something entirely different. Nagarjuna was a very smart guy, I think. He said that there are no set of concepts, there's no set of categories by which we can describe the external world that are not empty. In other words, what he was saying, for our purposes this morning, all contexts are empty. I have made the argument, I've tried to make the argument in this room, that science is a wonderful tool. It has led to all kinds of technological advances. And we have benefited greatly from it. But it consistently makes an error in one regard, one important regard as far as I'm concerned, and that is that it considers itself to be a description of reality. It's not. I'm sorry, it's not. As Nagarjuna said, all concepts and categories are empty, and so is science. It's basically empty. Nagarjuna went on to say that the very words that he was using to explain all this were empty as well. Everything's empty. And I think that this is one of the important features of this practice, and it's one that we need to pay attention to. One of the reasons that we do this practice is to understand our conditioning, is to at least become aware of it, and in becoming aware of it, helping ourselves and helping the world. So when we ask ourselves whether the Buddhism that we are practicing today in this country is authentic or not, I don't see how we can possibly come to the conclusion that it is. Simply because not only is this a different culture, but it's a different context. And that is a big difference. You see, that's a very fundamental difference. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. One of the things that has been pointed out both by David Loy and Charles Prebish and Alan B. Watson and David McMahon and Linda Human is the fact that American Buddhism, for the most part, maybe not as much here, but close to it. For the most part, American Buddhism has selected meditation as the core of the practice and has, for the most part, neglected everything else, which includes the ritual. I think that Charles Prebish has pointed out that what is really missing in American Buddhism is the Sangha. We do not have the Sangha. We sort of, cherry pick what we think is going to get us enlightened the fastest, and that's 30 minutes a day on the cushion, right? We can do that.
And we can do it in 25.
Oh, good. See? There you go. A practitioner. That's all we need to do. We don't need to join an organization. We don't need to participate in the Sangha. We don't need to,
Don't need a teacher.
Probably not. And not only that, we can study meditation. We got all these monks lined up in that place, where is it, in Minnesota, where they study Tibetans that are advanced practitioners, study their brain waves and, figure out how beneficial it is to the rest of the human race. We all sat down for 30 minutes a day. And that's very American. Liberty and justice for all. We're all individuals. Don't tell me what to do. Well, I can't help but believe, that we're missing something here. I am a big believer in sanghas of one kind or another. I grew up playing team sports, and I'm a big believer in it. Because you learn things in a team, you learn things in a sangha, you learn things about yourself, you learn things about other people that you cannot learn any other way. So, Thich Nhat Hanh has reputedly said that the Sangha will be the American Buddha. Of course, that's also been attributed to Maizumi and to several other people that I know of. Well, they're all wrong. It ain't working out that way, is it? I think mindfulness meditation, and I will point out, in collusion with Ehe Dogen Zenji and Wang Po and all the other people who said that all you need is to assume the posture and you're enlightened, are not taken strictly in that meaning. Not doing us any favors. I don't think.
They said that in context.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, Wang Po had that big knot on his head from all the bowing that he did. And he had one hell of a sangha. He had a big one. Now, I'm not going to say whether this is a good or a bad thing. How do I know? I'm a big fan of Dogen. There's no question about that. I think you assume the posture. That's very important. Is that all we need? Not so sure. Charles Prebish pointed out one thing that I really liked. He said, Zen Buddhism, or Buddhism in general, Buddhism in general has been in the United States for 150 years, give or take. You have to remember that it took 500 years for China to incorporate Buddhism. He says, Americans are always in a big hurry. You know, they want to do it right now. It's not going to happen right now. Even with the internet, I don't think it's going to happen right now. I think it takes a lot of experimentation and a lot of experience and a lot of lifetimes in order to bring it to fruition, whatever that may be. Of course, if we knew the answer to that, we could go out and build it right now, but we don't. But I would like to think that it includes some of the features that existed 2,500 years ago, namely the ritual, of which we have the tattered shreds left, and the Sangha, which means carrying this practice into our life. Buddhism has become like eating at McDonald's. You know, you can go in and order a meal, sit down and eat it in 30 minutes, and get up and leave.
Maybe it's more like Burger King because we want to have it our way.
Probably. I don't know. I was thinking that I find this to be a very interesting subject because you know, we modern people preoccupy themselves to a very great extent with what is happening inside their minds. Their anxiety, their neurosis, there are a lot of things that occupy our minds. And I ask myself, well, that being the case, what did pre-modern people think about? You know, what occupied their minds? Because they had succeeded in externalizing a lot of this. A lot of this was seen as either angels or demons. Something that they could exteriorize and look at from that vantage point. And the answer I came up with, I think is kind of interesting. I think that what they preoccupied their minds with was not our deviation from the norm or the perceived norm, but with morality, ethics, the precepts, the commandments. That's what preoccupied their mind. That's what they thought about. That's what internally they worried about, was whether their behavior was acceptable or not, according to the precepts or the commandments or whatever. And I think that's the reason there is so much more discussion in pre-modern times about morality than there is in modern times, where everything is relative and situational. And of course, who do we have to thank for that? Some guy in northern India, I think. What goes around comes around. Thank you.